So hi folks, welcome to the first talk from the series of this semester Videogram. Tonight Derek Debru will hold the presentation of the activities of Nyege Nyege tapes. Derek Debru is running an artistic platform called Nyege Nyege, based in Kampala, Uganda. Nyege Nyege is connecting community record studios, residency space, music label, booking agency, and festival, which is an ongoing yearly showcase that presents the projects Nyege Nyege been working on. Nyege Nyege as a community is representing the contemporary and, let's say, fresh electronic sound of the region, and also changing the discourse of what people might think about African music. And at this moment, I would like to leave the floor for Derek. And also one more time, thank you to being part of this series and to say yes to the invitation. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to share our story with everyone in the audience. I'll try not to speak too fast, and please feel free to sort of bring in questions as we go, and then we can make this, a conversation. So, should I start? So I guess I'm just going to tell you a little bit how things got started. Maybe a quick word, about today. Today it's been 7 years. We started this project in 2014, so actually 8 years now. And now we have about 200 shows, international shows, booked for our artists in the US and mostly in Europe. We do a lot of stages. Our festival is coming back. Probably going to be about 15 to 20,000 people this year, 300 to 350 artists over a period of 4 years, and things are really growing exponentially. Our roster is about anywhere from 60 to 80 artists, depending on a little bit who is touring, and we're also signing artists to bigger labels. And basically, we're pretty happy about where we are today and where things are going. But it's not always been that easy. And so we're now going back to the first days of Nyege Nyege. And then I'll tell you a little bit how we developed, mostly organically. I think that's a very important starting point, is that there wasn't really a vision from the start. I've been in Uganda for about 12 years now. I was there for, let me say, 5 years before starting this project. And I didn't come here thinking I was going to be involved in music necessarily. But again, organically, these things happened, and now I'm fully involved into this project. So basically, at the time we started, before we started Nyege Nyege, Arlen and myself, Arlen is my partner on this project, we were working at Kampala Film School, and basically teaching film and organizing small parties and cinema nights at a little local bar club in our neighborhood. And we were screening alternative African films. And when the films were finished, we basically brought the sound system, and we invited different DJs to come and play music. And then there was also a lot of MCs would come, percussionists. And basically every Wednesday was this sort of gathering of people. And it was something that brought everybody together, was that the kind of space that we were creating was really unique in the city. First of all, in terms of musical proposition, there wasn't really a lot of the clubs in Kampala sounded a little bit the same. And if you'd want to play anything different, be it different type of African music or other genres of music, it was always a bit problematic with the audiences. So once this space was created, very quickly, there's a lot of young people that came out of the cracks, like they came out of their own, bedroom productions and the kind of music that they were listening to. And slowly by slowly, you know, that community sort of strengthened around these Wednesdays. And at that point, I was a bit more involved in, let me say, with reggae music, hip hop. Basically, my friends, you know, were doing music and they didn't really have, you know, a lot of outlets. So I started making music videos, helping out with like studio rents, etc. But at the time of where our community got formed, we decided, you know, why don't we rent a house and make that house available to anybody that wants to get involved in music. Because from the get-go, what we realized was there was, and forgive me if sometimes I'm going to say certain things that are a little bit cliche, because obviously, you know, this story that we've dealt with is a story, you know, that has existed in a lot of places. But basically, there was a lot of talents, a lot of eagerness of artists, you know, to push their own music forward, but not really any outlets. So, you know, and plus there was an issue of access to knowledge, access to tools, access to networks. And historically, that community was a little bit deprived of that type of access. So, as I said from the beginning, we grew organically, which means that as we went, wherever the obstacles were, we decided to try and address those obstacles. And the first obstacle was there's no space. You know, there's no space to be yourself, to meet other people that might also, you know, some will qualify them as misfits. Some of them will say like, you know, weirdos. You know, a lot of people that just didn't fit exactly in the usual spaces sort of found a home in our space. So that was the first step. Then the second step, of course, was access to equipment. So very quickly, we realized that, you know, not everybody has laptops, not everybody has, you know, the means to get online, and access to the studio even less. So part of that house was dedicated to building a studio and making that widely available to the people from that growing community, as well as sort of, you know, putting laptops there, monitors, and basically little by little trying to put the tools available to that community. Then there was the question of quote unquote knowledge. You know, basically, you know, exposure to a lot of different kind of music is not always that easy here. It's not so easy to get access to music. Internet is still quite expensive, as well as sort of music production. There wasn't really any infrastructure that would help people with music production. So one way to sort of resolve that was that we started a residency program where, and that was like in 2014, yeah, 2014. We invited producers from Europe, producers from the States, as well as from the continent, people that already had experience in, let me say, Ableton, Fruity Loops, mixing, mastering, etc., and trying to quickly resolve that sort of gap that we felt was there in terms of know-how, production know-how. And that meant basically training, you know, getting certain members of the community that were the most inclined to learn production, and then starting to train on different programs, which then in turn could facilitate training others. And that's always been a little bit of the model. You train one person, that person will train another one, who will then train another one, etc., etc. And that's been really an integral part of the culture of our community, is that whatever you have, you can share it with others. And by bringing all the different things that we have together, we can move at a more interesting pace. So that was like the beginning. You know, the beginning was to try and support that community with the different tools that they needed in order to sort of grow into their own vision. And there was never really an idea of what we wanted the label to sound like, but we did know what we did not want it to sound like. And if we were going to go through all these efforts, it wasn't to compete with the 1,000 studios that exist in Kampala. So we really wanted to dedicate this space to the people and the type of music that did not have space with other studios. So parallel to that, we started organizing more parties. So the parties got bigger, the community also grew. Another aspect was that we came across a lot of very interesting music, first from Uganda, that nobody had ever heard of outside of Uganda. And again, that wasn't getting any attention locally. So that also started to guide a little bit the aesthetic of the label. And I guess a good example is Otim Alpha. So I'll tell you a little bit about our 3 first releases. It was Disco Vumbi, Otim Alpha, and Riddlor. And these 3 sort of are a little bit like the blueprint of how the label and the 2 labels evolved later on. So the first one was Otim Alpha. I happened to be in northern Uganda for a work trip for something else. In the beginning, all of our projects were sort of self-financed by the jobs we had. So I was in northern Uganda in a bar, and all of a sudden I hear this insane sort of polyrhythmic electronic sound that was like immediately like really exciting to me. So I sort of inquired, I went to see the DJ, I asked him for some music, and then found out about this genre that is called, later on got called Acholi-tronics, electronic music from the Acholi tribe. But at that point didn't really have a name. And basically what it was that northern Uganda was in very difficult conflict situation for about 15 years. But it's also been an ethnic group that was always very important about preserving their own culture. So the traditional style was that during weddings, you would invite a band of anywhere between 15 and 25 people, and these people would perform traditional music. All sorts of traditional music that go with traditional dances and traditional instruments from their particular region. And when the economy, because of that conflict, the economy was very complicated, instruments weren't always available, and these big bands became very expensive. So that was a time when a few producers that were starting to work on Fruity Loops mainly decided maybe we can make that music through our computers. And this is how that whole genre was born. And if we look across the continents, that is a trend, you know, so you can go to, let me say, South Africa and find Shangaan electronics, you know, which is basically based on, you know, Zulu rhythms. Or you go to Gabon and you will find Elone music, which really resembles footwork. And that also comes from their Bwiti tradition. Then, you know, you can go to Tanzania and find Singeli music. You can go to Kenya and find Bengatronics. In Eastern Uganda, you find Kadodi. So there's this whole range of electronic music from the continent that is what we say endogenous. That means that it is born from there and it is only for there, by that community, for that community, with really no expectation of trying to get it even outside of your own community. So that means that if you're in Kampala, you will not hear that music from northern Uganda, except if you're in a night from, you know, northern Uganda. Or if you are, let me say, in Bamako, you will not hear DJ Diaki, which we later released. He will play in villages. So at once there was already this discrepancy locally, where in capital city, people would prefer, let me say, Afro House from South Africa, or Trap from the US, or dancehall from Jamaica, or maybe their local music from that particular central tribe, but really have no regard for what was happening out. So that was the first interesting aspect. We so nobody here was trying to make, so never even heard of that stuff, you know. So they were just basically making their music computers. That gave a lot of interesting forms of electronic music that later on really caught the world's attention, and our label became a little bit known for that. And that is when we're sometimes, in my opinion, a little bit mislabeled as an electronic music sort of label and festival. But it is true to a certain extent that we do have a big love for the music made on computers from the continents. But that means that there's no techno at our festival, for example. You know, so, but we'll come back to that idea of sort of what is electronic music and who decides what electronic music is about. So that was the first sort of step. So then we went back to Northern Uganda. We met all the people, all the artists involving in that sound, the pioneers of that sound, and sort of saw who was interested in releasing with us. And at that point, we didn't even know what we were doing. You know, we just were super excited about music that existed, that wasn't known anywhere. And we thought, what can we do in order to get some attention to that music? And then we'll see a little bit how to move forward. And, you know, a small sort of in parentheses, but that might also, you know, contextualize a little bit the relationship with some of these artists, is there was one of the biggest ones is Tongweno, a producer of, you know, that sort of electronic music. And where we told them like, okay, you know, like we're gonna, you know, release your music, we'll have a contract, you get money from streams and from sales and this one and that one. And he wasn't interested in all of this. He was like, look, I've never made, my music is everywhere. I've never made 1 shilling from this. All I want is for you to get me famous so that I can get shows internationally. And because this is, in their minds, that's the only way you could make music. So obviously later on, you know, we were able to address some of these issues in the industry, but definitely that tells you a little bit about how detached these musicians and producers are from how, you know, the wider industry works. So we decided finally to work with Otim Alpha and Leo Palayeng, which are 2 of the pioneers of the genre. And Otim Alpha was one of our first bookings at Unsound, and he also toured extensively. And that was somehow one of the first artists we worked with. So that was our part of the 3 first releases. Then the second release was Alaike. Alaike is a producer from Kenya who was doing this style called Disco Vumbi, a bit influenced by Benga, a little bit influenced by house music, and a very singular artist. So there wasn't really any producer like him at the time, even though maybe today we'd look at it a little bit more differently, the kind of music that he makes. But at that point, we thought this is exactly the kind of outsider musicians, producers that we want to showcase, because it's just different. You know, like most of our artists, there's only one of them like that. You know, unless they are part of these particular genres like Singeli or like electronics, where you have entire scenes. So we invited Alaike to come. At that point, we didn't have the studio yet. So, but we were working, we had these parties working with musicians. So Alaike came and stayed at my house for 2 weeks, set up a studio in the living room, and invited all the artists that we were working with at the time. So there was some MCs, percussionists, traditional instrumentalists, and he made his first album called Disco Vumbi, which was entirely produced from my living room at the time. Mm-hmm. And then the third one was this producer called Riddler from Los Angeles. And Riddler was involved in some of the early hip hop of the sort of West Coast hip hop, LA hip hop. So basically the early 80s. There was a documentary made by Anna Duvernay called Good Life Cafe. And that was a little bit the beginning of freestyle. Maybe you're familiar with Freestyle Fellowship, with Project Blowed, Jurassic 5, and some of those acts that came out of that movement. So that was really underground stuff, but we'd always had a heart for sort of US underground hip hop. And it was a bit of a dream to sort of bring one of our personal heroes to Uganda. And when we reached out to him, he's an African-American producer. At that point, he was in his late 40s. And we told him, do you want to come to Uganda? We don't have much money, but we can pay for your flights. We can house you in our house, and you can stay with us for as long as you want to make music. So he was over the moon. First time in Africa, was a really sort of emotional and important travel for him. He was about to have a kid, you know, but he put everything aside and came for 3 months and worked with local MCs as a beat maker. But also we had a big collection. One of the works that Arlen did was digitalizing the whole Cambridge University archive. So we had a huge archive of African music, a lot of field recordings. And basically we gave all that to Ridlor, and he used that as a basis to create the album called Afro Mutation, which is really not even hip hop anymore. I'll send you guys downloads after this, so you know you can get a chance to listen to a little bit of the music I'm talking about. But that was basically an interaction between an African American, really conscious sort of producer, you know, really looking at, you know, what it means to be African American today in the US, and also what is that relationship towards the continent, and to work with sampling some of these field recordings and traditional music into more contemporary sounds. So these three were our first projects, and we decided to release the projects on tape. Obviously, we felt like, you know, vinyl was too complicated and too expensive. We couldn't afford it. In the kind of music we were making, there was going to be an interest amongst what we call music heads, you know, for lack of better words, in Europe. You know, people that are always looking for the new sounds, people that are really curious, people that are really curious about music, and that would hopefully see this as something fresh and new. So in order to have a bit more of their attention, we decided to release our music on tape. And also in order to have a physical product, we thought it was important and nice, you know, so a little bit visual elements that we could add to the label. That's why the label was originally called Nyege Nyege Tapes, although today we do both vinyl and tapes. And so we released these 3 cassettes, limited edition cassettes. And also in terms of cassettes, we also like the sound. So all these things combined, we released these 3 cassettes, not really knowing, you know, where this was going to go. Boomcat, which is a very important sort of platform that's both a distributor and also a sort of platform for buying music in the UK. Quite influential, maybe a little bit less today, but still quite an influential platform. And they took these 3 tapes and put them up as sort of like release of the week. And that's what got us started, you know. So already here you see some of the ingredients, you know, of making some music here that isn't really accepted here or encouraged here, and seeing how us being foreigners, we initially, you know, quickly, you know, found an interest in that music where other people weren't necessarily interested in it, except if they were from those said communities, for example, Otim Alpha. And then sort of working to some of these channels that are dedicated to underground and alternative music in Europe, and seeing how that sort of gave the initial validation to what we were doing. And had we not gotten that, it would have been much harder, because as you know, our story will develop, we will find that Europe was a very important part in giving these opportunities to these artists, and especially the sort of more underground, left field, alternative circles. So that's what started the label. That was the 3 releases. Today we have about 60 releases. We have scheduled about 2 releases a month until the end of 2024. And the kind of music we do is still underrepresented music, but it goes from metal to hip hop to traditional music to experimental electronics to these sort of endogenous styles of, you know, Barani from Mali, Singeli from Tanzania, Acholitronics from northern Uganda, Gom from South Africa, etc. So that was the first encouragement. You know, we thought, oh, look, you know, this is working out. And remember at that time, we're also not getting any funding. So I was working in communication for NGOs for a while here in Uganda before, and we were a bit disgusted by that model. You know, there was a couple of arts related organizations that were getting a lot of funding, but nothing was really resulting into that. So we thought, let's be free, you know, let's be independent and see the resources our community has, see the resources we have, and with what we have, let's try and move forward. And I think, you know, that really made us strong and resilient, you know, and really dedicated to what we wanted to do without having to tell, you know, without having anyone tell us how to do it. And I think that was really important from the beginning. So that was for the label. Then parallel to that, the tours didn't really start at that point, but the parties became bigger. And one year we had a sort of crossover of residents and guests and people that were going to be there. And we had sort of, we were doing parties of 300-400 people, and we found an amazing site. So we decided, let's go ahead and do a festival, because we needed a platform. You know, like our idea was, let's, if nobody want to book us except for our own parties, and there's no demand anywhere else, why don't we create a platform that is going to be dedicated to us? And when I say us, it means, you know, all of these communities throughout East Africa that feel that, you know, the underground is not getting supported. And like anywhere else where there's no government support, obviously you have to rely on the market. And when audiences don't have the means to support live music, when there's no culture of sort of giving towards artists, when there's no platforms, then it does become quite difficult. You know, so naturally, all these scenes really are eager for something to happen in their favor. And that first year, from a financial point of view, was traumatic in a way that we lost, you know, every lifetime savings that we had, and that was all gone by the end of the festival. There was about maybe 500 people in the middle of the rainy season for 3 days, but we invited a lot of the artists, the underground artists from Kenya, from the hip hop scene, from the electronic scene, from the metal scene, artists from Rwanda, everybody from Uganda was present. And just like that really gave us the energy and the feeling that we exist, you know, we exist and we have a reason to be, and our fans are there. They might be, you know, spread out, but at least this is a place where there was music throughout the 3 days, and we're able to, you know, put up really good shows. And the festival grew from year to year. It basically doubled. So in 2016, we had 1,500 people or 1,200, then 3,000 in 2017, then 6,000 in 2018, and then 13,000 in 2019 until COVID hit. So now we have already a little bit in peace both the community with our studios, and maybe if we have a time, I'll take you for a quick tour of the studios. And so a studio where people are free to make whatever music they want, as long as it's not the music that everybody's making anywhere else, because then, you know, there are other places where they're able to stay as long as they want, to develop at their own pace, as long as they're hardworking and driven, then, you know, the space is there for them to be able to stay there when need be, for us to invite artists from around the world. And today we get a lot of demands. You know, we work with a member of the Gorillas. We work with a couple of, you know, like high profile artists that come here and collaborate on projects. And then, so that is for the space with studios, etc. And we now also support studios in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and in South Africa. And our hope is that we can scale this to create these similar houses in different places on the continent. And then we have the festival that's a little bit the showcase of the year. And the last edition in 2019, we had about 50 to 60 bookers, festival programmers, journalists, basically coming to find out what's the pulse of music on the continent and in the region. So in terms of platforming and showcasing, Boiler Room also comes to the festival. So there's a lot of artists that by attending the festival were really able to jumpstart their career. And, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but artists like Campire, like Slickback, like Niloxica, like MC Ala, all had sort of launched through the festival and through this, through also the Boiler Room. So we had the festival, the incubator, and the label. Over time, the sort of amount of music that we would find, that people would send us, and that we would make, became so big that we couldn't release everything on the same label. So we added another label called Hakuna Kulala, which is slightly different in focus, a bit more club oriented, a bit more quote unquote urban, so a bit more hip hop, dancehall, and club electronics. But, you know, I invite you to go to our Spotify or our YouTube channel and sort of, you know, check it out for yourself. So then over time in 2017, maybe 2016 was the first time we got a booking from Unsound Festival and from another festival in Switzerland. So that, imagine, you know, our excitement. Unsound is quite a sort of forward-thinking festival that sort of is also known for breaking through artists, and they decided to book Otim Alpha. So on the back of that, Arlen and myself, we came, and then we looked for other shows, and that was a time where, you know, the four of us, Otim, Leo, Arlen, and myself, were just bussing through Europe, you know, sleeping on couches, playing in little cafes for 100 euros, and basically, you know, doing whatever we could to tour and to get that first experience. And today, obviously, we've sort of, you know, grown out of that, and we do, you know, stages at Primavera and at Dour Festival, and, you know, at We Love Green and Roskilde, etc. And so everything became like bigger, but that really took time. And in the beginning, some of our artists, we were just doing everything, right? Arlen and me were doing everything. And when it became too much, we would give up our artists or try and find for them agents. So, you know, big agencies like Paradigm or Earth Agency or, you know, Annex, etc., would then pick up our artists and take it from there. What we found at that point was that our artists, some of them had like really bad experiences, you know, touring on their own, being a bit left to their own device. It was, you know, for an African artist, not always speaking English. You know, a lot of our artists come from really poor neighborhoods or from villages, and so not really easy to like send you out like that on your own. And that's something that we felt European agents didn't really take into consideration. So it became a little bit problematic because we were doing all this work so to get the artists to a certain point, and then once they were touring, it really became, you know, not a really pleasant experience. So we decided, you know, let's get that also going and let's do our own agency. And a little bit, let me say 6 months before COVID, we officially started our own agency. We brought in one person that came to volunteer that had already experience in these sort of things. And they sort of joined us in trying to get as many shows for our artists. And that's the agency we have now. And for the first time, we're about to hire another person. So we're really excited about this because it was also getting a bit too much. So we added the agency component. So remember, we talk about organic, you know, and I feel like, again, you know, every time we needed something, we felt like, oh, this is not helping us. We need to do it ourselves. We need to do this, or we need to add this, or we need to get this. We just go ahead and do it. And the agency was part of that. For a while, we also ran that club where we all met. And then that, unfortunately, sort of COVID took that away from us. And a little word about COVID is obviously it was hard because that was the time where everybody was starting to tour. But luckily we had the house, so we keep on making music. Our network was quite good at that point, so we get a lot of online commissions, and we're basically able to stick together. And I guess the difference a little bit, you know, when we talk about labels, our label was set up because we needed it, you know, not because we wanted to set up a label, because we thought we needed a structure like that that can help everybody at once. And the way we are with our artists is, I guess, a very particular. It's, you know, it's almost like family at the end of the day, you know, like if somebody has an issue, if somebody has a problem, if somebody has a project, if somebody wants something from our collective, then collectively we try and, you know, address that. And the same way the agency functions almost like a little bank, you know, where you know that, oh, if you have going to be 5 shows in the summer, but it's still like 3-4 months away, and you have to pay rent, or you have to pay your school fees for your kids, or you know, you have to take your mom to the hospital, whatever it may be, we're also able to create some sort of economic net to to help out our artists. And you know, in the back of my mind, you know, economics is really critical, you know, and that's not something that we never wanted to just be a show for the West, and you know, to do a couple of cool articles in the Wire, and then you know, get a couple of nice shows and these sort of festivals that are very avant-garde, and then after that it's going to be someone else and then someone else. You know, the bottom line, the economic bottom line of making sure that our artists are able to profit from their craft and able to build, you know, a livelihood, a life from their music, that was always very important. And it sort of also guided a little bit our modus operandi, our approach. For example, you know, the agency doesn't charge money before that artist is getting a certain level of fees. Or, you know, there's a lot of artists that take a lot of time before their music comes out, and they also get, you know, sort of monthly support, or depending a little bit. But it's very important for us to see how can we make this into an economy that profits communities also, and not just individual artists. And in that way, really trying to see how we can create a system, an ecosystem that fits our needs and our vision, and not necessarily something that the global industry sort of imposes on you, you know. And we're looking at something that's a little bit more of a wider community subscriber-based model, where people understand what we stand for and what we're trying to do, and they already have an interest in our output, in the music we put out and the other arts that we put out, and to see how can we involve everyone into, you know, building something that is good for everyone, that is not only good for putting music out, but also making sure that young people have continued access to these platforms, that people have the ability to express themselves in safe spaces, and basically, you know, for the wider economic, you know, system to be profitable to artists here. That also means, for example, building audiences locally, something that we've really done with the festival, or the way we support other festivals. You know, I mentor a lot of young festivals across the continent. We support them with artists, with promotion, and really trying to see how can we become more independent from the European markets. That also means, you know, reaching out to new markets. We've done a lot of collaborations with China, notably with the Subcult label, with Indonesia, Yes No Wave label, in the US also with Never Normal, for example, in Europe also with Pan, and etc. So I guess that's a little bit where we are today. I'll touch a little bit in terms of, you know, Africa, you know, and what's African music, and obviously that term is a very dangerous term, because how do you fit 54 countries into one? You know, they often say like Africa is not a country, and indeed is not. And I could even say Uganda is not a country, you know, because a lot of these countries were designed according to, you know, colonial lines, very random. So you find that across every border on the continent, people are the same. They just happen to be cut by that border. So, you know, there is a history of sort of post-colonial interaction with Africa, and world music, for example, came out of this. You know, that has this sort of big bands, percussive, sort of dancing, sort of quote unquote vibe, you know, when it comes to African music. You know, you think about Youssou N'Dour, or you think about, you know, Orchestre Mangalepa, or some of the, you know, more classical sort of world music type acts. And then, you know, when it comes to, you know, Afro beats, you know, even up to today, you know, like African music, now everything is about amapiano, you know, but when you go to South Africa, there's a lot of genres of electronic music. And, you know, there's Gom, or there's Gubu, or there's Shangan, or there's like a endless stream, but amapiano somehow is now that sound of the continent. And because of that, there's like 100 other sounds that just don't get, you know, that kind of interest. And then when it comes to electronic music, you know, what's electronic music? You know, how, at which point did we decide that electronic music was going to be house and techno? When electronic music is really music made on machines, and the fact that this was sort of cornered as techno and house is extremely problematic. You know, one, because it is based on a type of you know, rhythmic rhythmic structure that, you know, is that sort of 4 to the floor, 4x4 sort of construction of music that is not the way people make music or see music in a lot on the continent or in Asia, you know, where we have polyrhythmics that look at totally different rhythm structures. So if now we look at techno and house music, that's a very narrow way to look at electronic music. So then we have to look at, okay, who decided that? Who decided on those terms? And we come back to sort of, you know, Western, you know, influence that has decided this was going to be electronic music. So the same way for world music, they decided that was going to be the music of the world. So think about who decides what the world is and what is not the world. So basically, you know, certain things, the people that decide this is world music consider themselves as different. And then electronic music, the people that were making techno decided that, okay, dancehall is not electronic music, or electronic music is not, you know, that sort of music from Niger, you know, synth, experimental synth music from Niger, or whatever other genres. So that sort of reading became quite a focal point to us to say that, look, don't expect anything from Africa, because what you will expect will just be too narrow. So, you know, our sort of approach is, we're not there to tell you what Africa is. We're just showing you and giving you examples of one of the things that's there, and to encourage you to find out by yourself and to really be diverse in you know, to show diversity, basically. You want to ask some questions?
Actually, I would like to ask. I would like to take on the last part of your talk, like when it comes to like how is African music like recognized by the, let's say, Western music and tradition. I would like to ask you, like, do you think your roots, or like also that you are originally like Belgian, from, you know, like a country that has a colonial history, or like the fact itself as a like white European, do you think this is in some way like influential in your work or in your practice as a curator? Or
Yeah,
like how do you
it's
work in the way that you are not interfering into the flow of the local culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question. And just as a parenthesis, my battery's at 2%. I might change to another computer in case I run out, just so
Yeah,
you
it is
know.
good.
So it's very important because, you know, like when you come to the continent as a white European person, you realize what it means, you know, to be where you're from and how people interact with you. And you have to definitely deconstruct your own imaginary and way to look at the world. So over time, you realize, you know, the sort of blind spots that you might have, or what you think is nice, what you think is not nice, etc. So from the very beginning, I think we were, both Arden and myself, extremely self-aware of our position and how to navigate that sort of complicated territory between telling someone, this is, you know, you can improve on this, or you can do something different, and at the same time making sure that that artist was going to find something that was truly unique to them. And so obviously the approach is like, depending on the cases, you know, like for example, if we look at music from Otim Alpha, there is a perfect example of something that nobody really is interested in Kampala in Uganda, and all of a sudden you find this like white European person, and it's like, wow, but this is amazing. How come nobody's ever heard of this? So yes, you know, there is there, you know, a sort of gaze that makes you that, you know, you're more interested in this. Then there is a sort of, you know, deciding on what to release, you know, and in that way also knowing that the European market is a little bit an important target in terms of, in economic terms, and in terms of sort of like building trends globally, that naturally, given that we have a lot of understanding about what is actually being played there and happening in clubs and happening in festivals, that it made it easier for us to highlight what we thought could work and what could not work. Then in terms of sort of like interacting with artists and being, because we're also not musicians, you know, so there's a double issue here, right? It's number one, you're not from there. You're already in a position of privilege and power, given the access, networks, knowledge that you might have that people don't have. So all of these things really need to be taken into account so that it sort of informs your relationships. And I think in terms of, you know, the outputs, we're also very quickly able to recognize a lot of Europeans on the continent somehow doing similar things as us, but with completely different results, where immediately you would feel like, okay, this is a white person, you know, adding a kick, or this is a white person that made this album cover, or this is a white, and these are white people that love Africa, that, you know, have been there maybe for a long time, but they couldn't get out of, they always thought like, I know something that these people don't know. And that's what I want to teach them so that we can go to Europe. Whereas in our case, we were like, we don't know, but we see that you have something that's really worth people to know. And we just want to do the work so that you can present yourself as you are to these other people there, you know, and we've had in the beginning, you know, when it came to like residents, for example, you know, when we weren't too much like experienced yet, where, you know, you'd find some big names from the UK come and for example, like, you know, this 25-year-old producer that has had a couple of hits, and then he'll meet this Ugandan harp player that's been a harp player for 30 years. And before they even ask for that person's name, they'll pull out, you know, a recorder and just record that person for 2 hours. And that's that. And then 6 months later, you're like, oh, here, I made a track where they use a little like sample of that harp, you know, and very quickly, you know, as a white person here and a European person, you have to realize your privilege. You know, you go into a world where you're favored to a certain extent, and you have to really understand what's the nature of that privilege and what is your responsibility? That can mean that I have power, but I don't exert it, or I try and exert it for the people that don't have that power, or, you know, I have to use my privilege as something that I bring to the table, as something positive, you know, and so why is it that, you know, other Africans have not done, you know, in Uganda what we've done? Maybe it is also because they didn't see there was a market for that. There wasn't any interest. They couldn't call, you know, they couldn't maybe send that email to this journalist or this one or that one. So, you know, yes, we came, you know, with privileges, but it was always very important for us to think about that all the times, and to really be very critical about, are we there? You know, can you locate us? And if you look at Nyege Nyege tapes and Akuna Kulala, you know, someone that's never known about it would probably think like, hey, there might be some European like music heads behind there, you know, and that's, I can't deny. And I'm hoping, you know, also by involving more people in the creation of the festival, the creation of the label, by, you know, also encouraging other people to start collectives and labels, so that everything does not fall back to us, because it does come with a lot of pressure today, you know, oh, Nyege 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 Nyege, everybody talks about it, it's a sort of plug. So then it's, some people are like, oh, why is it again white people that are there? So, you know, we also want to make sure that in 10 years from now, we've helped set up, you know, tens of festivals, tens of labels, people self-release on Bandcamp. They know how to, like, you know, hit up a festival. There's more agencies, there's more of everything. So we don't become the point of focus, but rather we just, you know, supported and facilitated an industry that's more fair, and where African artists can feel at ease, and where there's also not the obligation to be African, you know, and our label is also not, you know, sometimes we'll release some like experimental synth music from Greece, or, you know, some hip hop from the US, or, you know, so that we're also not putting into someone else's narrative, you know, because obviously today, you know, one of my favorite philosophers is Guy Debord. He writes about the society of the spectacle, you know, and today everything is about symbols. Everything is about how you present yourself, how do you tell your story, and that's not always to the advantage of the people concerned, because you're being forced to sort of, oh, this is my box, or I'm like female, queer, Ugandan, and I make experimental electronic music, and you're sort of forced to say that you're queer, that you're Ugandan, that you're this and this, rather than just putting your music out there and being like, look, I don't want to put my identity forward instead of my music, or I don't want to make African music as an African, you know? So I think within our collective, it's something that's very important, that we're very open in terms of, you know, making sure that people can be very critical about ourselves, and us being critical about ourselves. And obviously this is a work in progress, you know, and ideally, you know, we wouldn't be there, you know, but it so happened that we are, and that we've, you know, put our whole lives behind this project for the last 7-8 years, and that's where we are. And hopefully, you know, history will and our artists and the people that we work with especially will look at this as something that was beneficial, and as an example of, you know, white European males with privileges doing something that in the long run will make things more fair.
Thank you a lot for the answer. I will also like to continue with the topic of the privileges, because also like the last year and the current COVID pandemic showed us that they can be like even borders within the borders, and I'm pointing with this to the vaccination, like how this affected you as a booking agency. What I mean is that for many, I don't know, like European venues or European states, to enter, you need to have 2 or like 3 shots of vaccine that is like follow the standards of like European Medicines Agency, which is still oftenly not the thing that you can get within your region. So how
Yes
this
and no.
affected? But you know what I'm pointing to. So like how this is effective
totally.
to your work?
Yeah, I mean, This is a great example of how things are done here, right? And I'm just so you know, I'm at 1%. So in case I'll shift to my laptop. But on one side, the vaccination wasn't easily available. Secondly, we were getting vaccinations from the UK that the UK wasn't even allowed in their own country. You know, so plus a lot of people here weren't really wanting to be vaccinated. So in a true like sort of Ugandan style, and this is a bit off the record, but you can buy a vaccination here and you don't even have to be vaccinated. So, you know, you just call someone and they either come and vaccinate you, which we had the first one, we had about 15 people getting vaccinated at once. And then after that, people starting to get sick. There was issues around the vaccine, this one and that one. And we ended up just buying these vaccination cards for everyone. And then when we came to Europe, we transferred those to European vaccination certificates. And some artists decided to get vaccinated and other artists just went on without being vaccinated and just being tested often. So, you know, that's a little bit, sometimes you find your own solutions. I mean, honestly, the vaccinations did not affect the bookings. What did affect the bookings was the problem with visas. Luckily that year, we had a sort of commission with France. So we bought every artist we had on available on that French show. And then from there, we're able to, you know, like navigate through Europe at that time. Obviously tough because every travel you need to do a PCR. Sometimes your vaccination was not good. Sometimes we didn't get the sort of, they didn't accept our African sort of vaccine. So it was difficult, but I feel like all in all, we did sort of wiggle our way through and we managed.
Yes, and you was up to show us a short documentary, so maybe we can jump into this.
Now, Nyege Nyege. Nyege Nyege? Nyege Nyege.
Nyege Nyege.
Why am I here? To attend Nyege Nyege Festival?
Like, I've spent a lot of time going to festivals, like, all around the world. I don't think I've ever experienced anything quite like what just happened in there for 4 days.
What do you have to say about Nyege Nyege?
Nyege Nyege is good.
Yeah, Nyege Nyege is something that can make you happy. Nyege Nyege and my language is something like happiness.
Yeah, it's a great vibe. And the festival hasn't even started, so I'm excited to see how it's gonna explode in the festival. I guess I came to experience something new, something I haven't experienced before.
Nyege Nyege is just diversity.
And you know, there's this mainstream thing that really kills the music. Man, Nyege Nyege is just a revival of all that like good music which is trapped in there, you know.
And also like what I always see on festivals, every festival now these days call themselves as electronic festival, but most of the time it's just house of techno, you know. And electronic music festival is like so much more than house and techno.
Like yesterday we were talking about in France or somewhere, if you want to listen to metal, you go to a metal festival. You want to listen to noise, you go to noise festival. But here, you can have it all and just watch everything at the same time in the same place.
Brand new dance from Africa. Everybody.
Okay. Diversity, but like in different ways. Not only in colors, but also like who is the crowd.
Sumum Nazareti, Messen Selector, back again, yeah, Shakis, everybody dance, Agaba, Agaba.
From like, let me say, the gay scene, the ghetto, underground black scene.
Everyone from all walks of life being here, partying in peace and just enjoying themselves, having fun.
That alone is the root, is the power.
It's a bit of a cliche, but I always believe that music has the power to bring people together.
People are open, expressive, the way they dress, the way they, they dance and everything is like, people be themselves, and that's a beautiful thing.
Getting to know each other, listening to music, arts, fashion, life, nature, everything.
Icyambere na mbere dusangira umunezero w'umuziki wacu twakuye i Burundi.
Kodu means exchange. I think that's an ultimate word that explains what happens at the festival.
People's music tastes are extremely malleable. So even in a place like Uganda where there was quite a tight kind of like music taste, we've seen over the last few years people embrace like more intense music and more variety. The more dialogue you have when it comes to music, I mean, the better it is, the more interchange there is.
All the kids that came also from Indonesia and China.
I will stop here so we can continue with Derek. Actually, thank you for the sharing of the document. It brings me to another question that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
And it is like, in the last year, like you really grown. As you mentioned, as a festival, that you are like creating like stages at Primavera, etc., like having articles in Wire and so on, and like how the thing that you are start to be recognized worldwide is perceived within the local context. I mean, within the local cultural, but also political context.
I mean, two different levels, I guess. It's taken a bit of time for people here to recognize, what we were doing, but now it does generate a lot of pride, So we've been fortunate enough, Unfortunately, it does happen sometimes when you need to be validated from outside, and that's something that we still sort of suffer from here. So for an artist to go abroad and to come back, all of a sudden being recognized, like take the example of MC Yala, for example, which has been doing hip hop since the late 90s and, wasn't really getting any attention. And then she went to Europe, did her first album, and then she came back and was nominated, MC of the Year in Uganda. The same for the festival. We also got some awards from the government there. So there's a part that recognizes both, the sort of cultural spotlight that Uganda is getting from sort of promotion for the country and for its culture, and also I would say economics, you know, like especially in terms of the festival, it's something that our festival is very much grounded in a local community where we hold the festival. That means that a lot of people are getting jobs, hotels are booked, you know, a lot of artists are getting opportunities to get booked. So from an economic point of view, it's also very important. So that's been some of the positive aspects. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the type of music we put out, sometimes it's not always very well received. Some of it can be a bit dark at times. And then some of it is a little bit like, oh, why do you concentrate on this kind of music when we have these stars and you don't release those guys? You know, so that's also there. And unfortunately, there's still a part of the government that is highly conservative. They're really much influenced by sort of new American churches. And there's an anti-homosexual sentiment that comes from that. And given that our platform is open, so naturally, we're really connected to that community and have a lot of artists that are queer, and we also invite a lot of queer artists to the festival. In 2019, in 2018, we were almost shut down. They had to discuss the festival in Parliament on the basis that it was a sort of devil worshipping and, you know, sort of homosexual ground where we're trying to lure kids into homosexuality and those sort of things. Then in 2019, we sort of pushed the envelope a bit when Authentically Plastic did a boiler room in drag. That got us like a lot of heat. So it's a bit of a back and forth, you know, between us and the government, knowing that now we're really like a sort of cultural moment for the whole country. Everybody, you know, talks about Nyege Nyege and is excited about it, that it's not that easy to shut down. And plus, we're not an activist organization in the more traditional terms of activism. So because of that, sometimes we've had a couple of hurdles with the government. And, you know, once the festival becomes more successful, people also think you make a lot of money out of it. So, you know, dealing with police and government authorities, etc., is always a little bit tricky. But, you know, it comes with the territory, and it's something that we've also been able to navigate over time. And also not to, you know, we were talking about before about the sort of like Western gaze, and this is very much present when it comes to these sort of issues here. So often, you know, the sort of, how to say, the superiority of the West is asserted and re-emphasized through its media by sort of pinpointing every time there's something wrong with Africa, you know, and this is, you can see a little bit, you know, if you're a bit, you know, critical towards the way Africa is being represented in Western media, you'll find that, for example, when there's an issue around homosexuality, very quickly, oh, Ugandans are homophobic, oh, Ugandans are backwards, oh, you know, this. So it's always sort of reasserts this between like who's more advanced and who's not. And, you know, if we look at queer rights, or, you know, if we look at the, you know, the situation of marginalized people throughout Europe, it has issues, you know, and there's no need. We don't see like Ugandans constantly talking about, you know, queer rights in Czech Republic, and that wouldn't also be, you know, necessarily fair towards like, you know, Czech people. And I think it's the same when it comes to us, you know. Yes, there are issues, and some of them are culturally, you know, sort of anchored. And, you know, there's people don't kiss in the streets here. A boy and a girl don't hold hands in the street here. So you can already see a little bit where that sort of conservative element comes from. But at the same time, Ugandan people are very free, are very accepting, are very like, you know, happy-go-lucky sort of people. So we're always very careful when we talk to sort of foreign and white European audiences about talking about these things, because sometimes it can reinforce stereotypes, which is something that we do everything to try to fight against.
Thank you. Yes, I would just like to open the floor for the question or comment. So please, like, feel free to ask directly or just write to the chat.
Great. Whoever asks the questions gets a free ticket to the festival. Not a flight ticket.
I will also go back to the tapes, because like you started releasing the things a part of the digital on the tapes, which it's logical from the economical reasons, but also because like releasing on the tapes has its specifics. You know, you have like the tape, the side A, the side B. You know, like to decide how to design the structure of the release. Also, you have like only like 7-bit depth, so the dynamic need to be kind of changed to the material and so on. So like nowadays, when you can afford to have like things out on the vinyl, like why to still keep on releasing on the tapes when it's not anymore an like economic question?
I guess, first of all, it's still an economic question because vinyl is still much more expensive than tape. Then secondly, the pressing times are getting so long that sometimes an artist does not want to wait 6 months for the vinyl to come out. So now sometimes the tape is easy, you know, like if something is like hot and we wanted to release it, then it's easy, you know, in a couple of weeks, you can get a tape ready. Whereas, you know, a vinyl can take up to like 6 to 8 months. So that's a big factor. And then we also found also okay to do a digital and tape release. And then when the vinyl is ready to sort of do a reissue on vinyl, which we're also doing more and more now. So I guess it's really the question of there's still a bit of economic terms, but luckily we have a distributor now that also advances us a lot of the pressing investments. But it's mostly a question of timing, I guess.
And do you have like local sources when it comes to tape duplication?
No, unfortunately not. Tapes have been slowly disappearing since the early 2000s. So you still find them, but it's hard to find tape manufacturers. And actually worldwide, it's actually, although tape has gotten a sort of, you know, new lease of life and interest, there's still few places where you can get tapes made.
And I would like to continue with the questions, and like another question like that is pointing to making art, like making music, is like the current situations. I'm not only like referring to the COVID, but also the climate changes, or like within our context, we have a war going on in Ukraine. So these situations are really deeply changing or defining the ways how we interact with each other, how we work, how we share the free time, how we party, etc., or like how we are building up relationships. Where do you see in this situation the strength of the musical practice, or has the music and its form of sharing, such as festivals, making releases, etc., still the ability to connect, or like to share the symbolic values, or to transform the current towards the better futures?
I mean, yes, I think so. You know, in short, I think today music, clubbing, and basically all of human activity has become political. You know, so whatever you decide to consume, however you decide to express yourself, however, you know, you decide to go about this life, it is by nature politicized, and it becomes very much hard to not be political. So in that way, you know, I think music is still very important because it allows people to express themselves in a world where the way we express ourselves is getting narrower and narrower. And I think it's important, you know, to have spaces where everybody can express themselves. In terms of representation also, you know, we found that, you know, the music industry has still been really much skewed towards white European males. And that is also something that, you know, we can try to change. In terms of the festival, I think, at least for us now, diversity is a very like important thing for us, you know, and not just diversity of race or nationalities, but diversities of worldviews and diversities of economic upbringing, etc. And a festival or a club or a party allows us to leave a lot of these sort of like boundaries between one another away, you know, and when we connect on the dance floor, when we connect at a festival, then that's also something that, you know, can expand our mind and can make us more understanding of the other and can make us more sort of interested in the diversity of human expression. So in that way, it's very important. I think for us, you know, yes, there is the war in Ukraine, and you know, I'm not gonna name all the other wars. Yes, there is climate change, but being here, you know, the struggle is constant, you know, and I think the world is in a place where people all over the world are struggling against oppressive regimes or oppressive structures that, you know, make it difficult to live. And so, you know, when you organize yourself along the contours of a community, then you're also trying to invent how to work together, live together, interact with one another. And I think in that line, it's been very critical for us to connect with other communities that share our values and our ethos, and that we can connect with and exchange with and support one another and amplify one another in order over time to reach a critical mass where maybe things of a much bigger sort of societal change or political nature can happen. But I think for us as a label, a festival, and a community, we don't want to be a gimmick, you know, we don't want to be entertainers, you know, like we whatever we do, it's always geared towards a vision of systemic change. And these things don't happen from one day to the other. And the way we interact with one another is a way where we can improve, the way we organize ourselves, you know, the way we treat artists, the way we, you know, at every point of the way, we try and be conscious of the world we're in and how do we want to try and make it better.
Thank you, really, thank you for this. Now I will jump to the question from the chat. Lucia is asking us like something that was kind of touched during the talk, but okay, I will just read it loud. Will you have some example of sensitive, some not appropriating or not exploiting way of Western art is working with futures of traditional music or field recording from Uganda? I mean, opposite approach to those guys who just pull out the recorder and stole the cool sound of African harpists and used in their music without giving the credits to the harpist. It is actually possible to not appropriate or misuse such source. It is valid to get inspired. Thank you for the question, Lucia, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. That is indeed a great question. I'll give you an example of three young sort of UK British musicians that came to our festival in 2016. They came for a residency. They were running a small label. Were all sort of involved in the electronic scene. They were looking to collaborate with some of our artists. So one of the groups that we've always worked with is the Nilotica Cultural Ensemble. That is a group of percussionists, traditional musicians, but also it's geared towards, you know, making fashion and such things. And they decided, oh, we're going to work with those guys. And then they made a video, which I would love to share. I don't know if it's still online, but you could really feel this sort of like these young British kids. And you could really see how they were going to teach others how to make music and what was good. And they left like without really like any interesting projects, you know, and yes, they had a video and a couple of tracks, etc. But we felt like that was totally, you know, a wrong approach. And amongst these members, Jacob, he was a drummer. He also felt like, look, I did not feel comfortable in the way we came in, recorded everyone, not necessarily even being experienced recording artists. So he came back, and spent 6 months here, came back with a friend of his, Peter, who is a synth player, and they engaged 4 percussionists from the Nilotica ensemble and basically worked on an album for 3-4 months. And on the basis of the percussionists would bring like their traditional rhythms, and then together they would build arrangements around that. So they released 2 EPs with us. Then they got signed to Cram Disc, a big Belgian label. Did 1 album. Now they just finished their next album from our studios. And when you see these guys, of course they had to learn, how to be together. And, these percussionists, the understanding of contracts or of how certain things, touring, etc., worked. But what we found that over time, there's a real friendship that developed, and in how to arrange music together and how to make sure that we're set. And I think, and in my opinion, this closer step to some place where everybody's satisfied. And the most important term here is agency. If you are in these type of collaborations, often the African artist is at risk of losing agency purposefully, by just not wanting to get involved in certain conversations. Maybe the white producer knows better what they want, or maybe from the other side where someone, the foreign producer is not given the chance to the artist to sort of express themselves and how the final music is going to sound like. And, that aspect of agency when we organize, collaborations, and I think HHY in the Kampala unit is also a really good example of this sort of collaboration that worked. And why did it work? Because from the get-go, there was conversations and artists, every artist in the collaboration was given a voice and was given the opportunity to decide where these projects were going to. And then the result is also much more interesting. And I could name a lot of projects of the other way around, where it just sounds like African music made for white people, and that's not the kind of music we want to make.
Do you think we can, because now you are in the residency and studio place, do you think you can make us a short tour?
Yeah, let's go. So, Czech students. This is a producer, Chris Man, from DRC Congo. Great producer. His album is about to come out. This is Cabochet. That's the pop artist that,
Mad cute, just mad cute.
He likes to be cute. Is here. She's the one that heads our booking agency. So you can see this is how we eat from the villa, especially when PQ is there. Then there is Black Bandana, hip hop star.
About to come out with a Dead Master, and Alan's going to be promoting it.
Exactly. So a big album coming out. You can see here, this is a little bit the sort of outside decoration of our sort of courtyard. Is the studio open? So there's Studio 2. It's closed now, but basically where people learn about DJing and video editing. One of our he's the residency manager, been with us for almost 6 years. We're live with students from the Czech Republic.
Oh, hey. You're the first person I know from the Czech Republic.
You know some people there?
No.
Okay.
This is the first one.
So you have to book Ray. You can see like some of his costumes for his show. He's really much into fashion also. And then this is sort of like his workplace. You can see it's a bit messy, of course. But anyway, some costumes, a camera, and and then, you can, there's a little bit of a sort of courtyard here. And now you cannot see cannot see very well. Let me see if someone else is there. So yeah, that's a little bit our place. There it is. We have some really nice artwork from this project called the Saluni, and it focuses on the politics of Black women's hair. And then you can see there's a couple of like sort of artwork from, you know, some of our like early parties here, like some of our sort of like touring. So yeah.
Nice. Really, thank you for this.
No, pleasure.
Okay, I think I just had the last question that just jumped into the chat.
Yeah.
I have a question concerning the fundings. Do you feel there is enough cultural funding for such activities? Do you depend on it, or is it an extra? Are these fundings administration heavy for you to deal with, or do you struggle with something specific regarding it? Yeah, so questions focused on.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Financing.
It's a good question. The way we started was without funding, and there might have been funding available at that time, but a lot of these projects, they usually start with funding and then do the project, and we just wanted to do it differently. And the other aspect is now we do get like once in a while sort of project-based funding for like, you know, holding residencies or, you know, bringing artists over or etc. The problem is that sometimes they are very heavy on the sort of administration, you know, and unfortunately, that's a little bit our weak point. You know, our weak point is that we're not that good with like, you know, keeping every other receipt and reporting on everything. We're good at doing, but not always good at sort of administering those sort of things. So it has its good sides. Obviously, you know, sometimes, for example, during the pandemic, Roskilde Foundation helped us with, I think it was $10,000 to cover for the rent for our space for a whole year. That was really, really important at the time. So, you know, it depends a little bit on the funds. It depends on the amounts. For example, we just received a very big fund from Germany. That's about 250,000 euros. And that is a sort of project-based fund, which has also a set of problems because basically it will cover a residency for 2 years for 40 artists. But within that, for example, is not the rent of the villa, or is not our agency, or is not like, you know, the people that are working or that we want to hire. So sometimes I feel like we're lacking sort of structural funding that would help you basically become a solid organization, as opposed to helping you with that album or that tour or that project, because at the end of the day, there is an infrastructure behind it that needs to, you know, survive. I mean, we're still, you know, really broke and don't really have like salaries or this or that, you know. So in that respect, we're still very much a DIY operation, but hopefully, you know, we can get out of it. And the model that we've opted for is really through the festival. The festival hasn't really made a profit yet, but we hope that this year, with more sponsors on board, more people buying tickets, we're able to sort of have the funding to at least pay for the things that don't make money, like the studios, like the villa, etc. You know, like, you know, hiring people. And then, but over time, I guess there's two different sort of economic aspects. One is strictly for the artist speaking. So artists can have access to funding, and then a successful artist that goes on tour will come back with maybe 3,000 euros, sometimes 15, 20,000 euros, you know, so making money from their sales, from music, etc. So, you know, from an individual point of view, I think the economics are getting much better. From a general point of view, and from our organization perspective, it's still a little bit difficult to make ends meet, at least to extract enough profit in order to pay for these things that don't make a profit, don't make money. But you know, we are driven by by our dreams and the passion we have and the mission at hand. And, you know, funding or no funding, we will continue. And I think it's very important for organizations here to get out of this sort of funding. And personally, I tend to prefer corporate sponsorship because at least, you know what someone wants in return. And, you know, for example, you know, we'll get 5,000 euros from the French embassy. And then after that, they're complaining that they're not everywhere in our communication. But maybe a corporate sponsor will give you $20,000 to be part of your communication, you know, like, so there's always this idea of this sort of charity vibe, you know, of like, oh, the helping hand, let's help these guys out, this and that. So it also feeds into a certain narrative of like, you know, we've never done really a fundraiser for anything. And I think we could, but it's also not a narrative that we want to put forth. You know, we want to try and make it the way, you know, a label in Czech Republic would make it, or a festival in anywhere in the world would make it. And we believe that, you know, through the strength of our music and the strength of our work, that we'll be able to do something that, you know, might not make millions of dollars, but at least will be able to make us strong and sustainable.
Great. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Denisa.
I think when there are no more questions, I think I would like to stop it here and thank you one more time for being part of the series, for your time, for the tour, for all the answers and the presentation. It was really a pleasure. So Derek,
thank you for this invitation. Yeah. I hope that, you know, your students will also get something from it. I'm going to write my email in the chat box. If anybody has additional question, you know, today or, you know, sometime from now, please always feel welcome. And, you know, if you ever come to Uganda, please come and visit us. We are playing in Czech Republic. Then hopefully we can also invite you and see you at our shows.
Okay, great. So hope see you on the dance floor.
See you on the dance floor. That's it.
Ciao. Nice night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.